So today we've got the architecture of madness on DJX Chronicles. We'll see about sanatoriums and asylums. For centuries, society grappled with the human mind and built incredible, yet terrifying structures to contain its perceived madness. This isn't just about abandoned buildings. It's a journey through the chilling evolution of mental health care, revealed through the very architecture designed to heal or to imprison. You'll never look at a grand old building the same way again. Echoes of Isolation. The Sanatorium's Genesis. In the 19th century, tuberculosis was a devastating global health crisis, known for its relentless progression: coughing, weight loss, night sweats, and eventual death. It claimed countless lives, particularly in the crowded, urbanizing areas where poor sanitation and malnutrition fueled its spread. By the 1800s, tuberculosis was responsible for roughly 1 in 7 deaths in Europe and North America, earning it the grim nickname, the White Plague. With no effective medical treatments, antibiotics like streptomycin wouldn't arrive until the 1940s. Physicians and communities were desperate for solutions. The lack of a cure led to the sanatorium movement, pioneered by figures like Hermann Bremer in Germany and Edward Livingston Trudeau in the United States. Bremer, who opened the first sanatorium in Gorbersdorf, now Sokolowsko, Poland, in 1854, believed that rest, nutrition, and exposure to fresh air could bolster patients' resistance to tuberculosis. Trudeau, inspired by his own recovery in Adirondack Mountains, founded the Adirondack Cottages Sanatorium in Saranac Lake, New York, in 1884. These institutions aimed to isolate patients to prevent the disease spread while providing an environment thought to promote healing. Sanatoriums became a response to both medical necessity and public health fears, as tuberculosis's contagious nature made isolation a practical, if stigmatizing, measure. Sanatorium design was rooted in the belief that environment played a crucial role in combating tuberculosis. Architects and physicians collaborated to create facilities that maximized natural elements, light, air, and space, thought to counteract the disease's progression. Key principles included abundant fresh air. Sanatoriums were often built in rural or mountainous areas with clean air, far from populated cities. Large windows, verandas, and open-air sleeping porches allowed constant ventilation, as fresh air was believed to strengthen the patient's lungs. The open-air treatment was central, with patients spending hours outdoors, even in winter, wrapped in blankets. Natural lighting Buildings were oriented to capture maximum sunlight, as ultraviolet rays were later found to have bactericidal effects on Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Large south-facing windows and solariums ensured patients were bathed in light, thought to invigorate health and morale. Spacious grounds. Sanatoriums were set on expansive estates with gardens, walking paths, and forests to encourage gentle exercise and mental tranquility. The natural surroundings were not just therapeutic, but also isolated patients from urban contagion and social stigma. Functional designs with interiors that were minimalist, with easy-to-clean surfaces to reduce infection risks. Patient rooms were often individual or small to limit disease transmission. Common areas, like dining halls, were airy and open to maintain the focus on ventilation. Notable examples like the Paimio Sanatorium in Finland, designed by Alvar Aalto in 1933. Though later than the movement's start, took these principles to new heights, integrating modernist architecture with patient-centered design, such as custom furniture or for maximum comfort and hygiene. Sanatoriums were more than medical facilities. They were cultural and social phenomena reflecting the era's hopes, fears, and limitations. For many, they represented a beacon of hope, an innovative attempt to manage an otherwise untreatable disease. Wealthy patients flocked to luxurious sanatoriums in places like Davos, Switzerland, immortalized in Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain in 1924, where rest and routine offered a semblance of control over a terrifying illness. For the affluent, sanatoriums were almost spa-like, blending medical care with social prestige. For the less fortunate, however, sanatoriums were often a last resort. Public institutions, underfunded and overcrowded, could feel more like places of exile than of healing. Patients were frequently separated from their families for months or years, leading to a sense of isolation. That gave sanatoriums their haunting reputation. The stigma of tuberculosis, associated with poverty and moral failing in some circles, compounded this alienation. Yet, sanatoriums also fostered unique communities where patients formed bonds over shared struggles, and staff dedicated themselves to care despite limited tools. The movement waned with the advent of antibiotics and improved public health measures post-World War II. But sanatoriums left a lasting legacy. They shaped early public health strategies, influenced hospital design, and underscored the interplay of environment and health. In their time, they were both a desperate response to a deadly epidemic and a testament to human resilience in the face of medical uncertainty. The asylum's grand design, a paradox of cure. The shift from local poorhouses to dedicated asylums for mental health in the 19th century reflected changing societal views on madness, moving from seeing it as a moral failing or social burden to a medical condition requiring specialized care. Poorhouses, often overcrowded and indiscriminate, lumped together the poor, disabled, and mentally ill, offering little beyond basic shelter. As reformers like Dorothea Dix advocated for humane treatment, asylums emerged as purpose-built institutions, driven by a belief that environment and structure could aid recovery. This was spurred by Enlightenment ideas and the rise of psychiatry as a discipline, which framed mental illness as treatable, though still steeped in stigma. As it will always be, Victorian-era asylums were architectural behemoths designed to inspire awe and order. Their ornate facades, like Gothic arches or classical symmetry, projected authority and permanence, signaling society's commitment to addressing mental health, while subtly reinforcing control and segregation. Facilities like London's Bethlem and New York's Blackwell's Island Asylum used grand designs to convey optimism about curing madness, yet their scale and isolation often intimidated patients and staff alike. High walls, barred windows, and sprawling grounds underscored containment over care, with aesthetics making the grim reality of overcrowding and neglect within. Moral treatment, pioneered by figures like Felipe Pinel and William Tuck, emphasized compassion, routine, and environment to restore patients' rationality. Asylums' layouts were meant to support this. Airy wards, communal spaces, and landscaped gardens aimed to calm and rehabilitate. Kirkbride plan asylums, popular in the U.S., featured long, staggered wings to maximize light and air, believed to promote mental clarity. In practice, however, underfunding, staff shortages, and growing patient numbers turned many asylums into custodial warehouses. The grand design became a paradox. Spaces meant for healing often perpetuated isolation and control, undermining the very ideals they were built to embody. And a lot of asylums ended up being very bad places where, like, they would work people to death. I know, for example, there's an asylum that used to exist in Frankfort, Kentucky, that's no longer there, obviously. The building still stands, but it was essentially a work camp where they took the mentally ill and worked them to death in a broom factory. There were even mass graves and stuff. You can read about it, but I don't think there's much evidence other than that. Anyway, where was I? Hold on. Innovation, isolation, and the built environment. Sanatoriums, designed primarily for treating tuberculosis and other chronic illnesses, incorporated specific architectural features to maximize exposure to therapeutic elements like fresh air, sunlight, and natural surroundings, which were believed to aid in recovery. Key innovations included open-air pavilions. As I said before, these structures were designed to ensure maximum ventilation, a critical component of tuberculosis treatment in the pre-antibiotic era. Pavilions often featured large windows, sliding glass panels, or entirely open walls to allow constant airflow. For example, the Adirondack Cottage Sanatorium in Saranac Lake, New York. I messed that name up again. Founded in 1884, used small individual cottages with wide porches where patients could sleep exposed to fresh air, even in the winter, as I had said before. This design minimized the spread of infection and aligned with the fresh air cure philosophy. They had the verandas, notable innovations. Revolving verandas or rotating sunrooms allowed patients to follow the sunlight through the day, maximizing exposure to ultraviolet rays. The Paimio Sanatorium in Finland featured such verandas with patient rooms oriented to capture the sunlight and equipped with adjustable balconies. Aalto's design also included ergonomic furniture like the Paimio chair, angled to support lung function by easing breathing. Heliotherapy and roof terraces. Many sanatoriums, such as Zonnestraal Sanatorium in the Netherlands, built in 1928, designed by a Jan Duiker, incorporated flat roofs with terraces for heliotherapy, which is just sun exposure. Patients were wheeled into these terraces to bask in sunlight like lizards. That was added, sorry. With roofs designed to provide unobstructed access to natural light while shielding from the wind. These innovations reflected a blend of medical theory and architectural ingenuity, prioritizing environmental interaction over aesthetic or traditional design. However, they also required patients to adhere to strict regimens, often isolating them from urban life to maintain the purity of the therapeutic environment. Asylums, originally built for mental health treatment, embodied a paradox. They were designed to heal, but often became symbols of the opposite. This duality is evident in their architectural evolution. Early asylums, like the York Retreat in England, that was built in 1796, adopted the moral treatment philosophy, emphasizing humane care in serene, nature-focused environments. The retreat's design included large windows, communal spaces, and gardens to foster calm and social interactions. Similar, the Kirkbride plan, like I talked about before in the U.S., advocated sprawling linear campuses with staggered wings to ensure maximum light, air, and views of landscaped grounds, believed to soothe the patient's mind. Over time, these same designs facilitated control and separation. High walls, locked wards, and remote locations, often chosen for their tranquility, isolated patients from society, reinforcing stigma. The Kirkbride Asylum, such as the Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts, became overcrowded, with their vast campuses turning into self-contained worlds where patients lived indefinitely. Features like long corridors and segregated wards enabled surveillance and restraint, shifting the focus from therapy to all-out containment. The monumental architecture of many asylums, with imposing facades and Gothic or classical styles, projected authoritarianism, but also intimidated patients, who often felt trapped within these grand structures. And the public came to associate them with madness and exclusion, rather than healing. The perception was compounded by the reuse of abandoned asylums as prisons or haunted attractions in modern times, cementing their legacy as places of confinement. The architectural style of sanatoriums and asylums significantly shaped patients' experiences, with designs reflecting both medical priorities and social attitudes toward illnesses. I'm going to go over a few case studies illustrating diverse approaches to the asylums, unless I've already said them before, obviously. There's a couple. I'll just list them if I've already explained it. The Paimo Sanatorium in Finland, as we talked about before, was very modernistic, with functional designs focusing on patient-centric details. Obviously, it had the big, huge, white-walled interiors with south-facing windows and the balconies for air and the open-air stuff, like I was talking about before, going off the idea that nature can heal. I kind of brushed over the surface of that one because I've already talked about it a few times. The Trenton State Hospital in the U.S. was built in 1848, based off of the Kirkbride plan. It was a Victorian monumental and followed the typical linear layout of the Kirkbride plan. It had the sprawling campuses with, separated wings like the other places did, very high ceilings, very big properties. Designs prioritized light and air and natural healing, just like the other ones. Patient experiences it was nature-filled environments, aligned with the idea that you can do moral treatment. But overcrowding grew by the late 19th century, and the vast campus became a labyrinth, with patients feeling lost in long corridors and isolated from the outside world. Sounds like it ended up being more harm than good. And then, of course, the Zonastral Sanatorium in the Netherlands that I spoke of before. It was Dutch modernism, emphasizing the transparency and lightness with lots of glass, steel frames, open plan pavilions with the ethereal structures that blended with natural surroundings, terraces in the roof, minimal interiors, and partitions would maximize light and air circulation. But, of course, the open-air design fostered a sense of freedom, enhancing therapeutic experiences. However, the utilitarian aesthetic could feel cold and remote. Obviously in a remote location, which reinforced isolation from family and caused a lot of distress in some patients, obviously. Then we have already spoken about the Bethlehem Royal Hospital in the UK, built in 1815 with a neoclassical Victorian add-ons. Had, of course, the big symmetrical facades and large windows and other Victorian buttresses and things of that nature to make them look intimidating, I guess, for the stigma of control. It's just a lot of alienation. They didn't treat people right. That's the moral of that. Anyway, the architectural innovations of sanatoriums and asylums reflect a historical movement when the built environment was seen as a direct tool for healing. Open-air pavilions, revolving verandas, and sprawling campuses were groundbreaking attempts to integrate medicine and architecture. However, their remote locations and institutional designs often deepened patients' sense of isolation, transforming therapeutic spaces into symbols of exclusion. The contrast between sprawling, nature-focused designs like the Kirkbride Asylums, compact modernist structures like PAMO, highlighted how architectural priorities shaped patients' experiences, sometimes empowering, sometimes alienating. Really quickly, I'm going to add something more about that Frankfort Asylum I was talking about. 1 minute. Okay, sorry. It was the former Kentucky State Institute for the Education of Feeble-minded Children and Idiots. Forgive my language, that's the way they worded it. Later, Kentucky Training Home, and then the Frankfort State Hospital and School in 1860 to 1972. It was an institution in Frankfort, Kentucky, established to care for people with intellectual disabilities. They established in 1860 as the Kentucky State Institution for the Education of Feeble-minded Children. The name was changed while the facility underwent several name changes, including the Kentucky Training Home in the 1940s, and finally the Frankfort State Hospital and School around 1963. Its purpose was established to educate and train children with intellectual disabilities. It closed down in 1972. Interestingly, the year my mom was born. That's fun. Legacy: The institution's history and the lives of the people who were residents are a topic of historical study and are documented by organizations like Kentucky Historical Institution, of course, and I don't know why they listed it, but Wikipedia. But obviously, note on the terminology there. The term idiot and imbecile are heavily outdated and considered offensive and stigmatizing, which is not what I meant. They were once used as diagnostic labels for individuals with intellectual disabilities, just like everybody who happens to be watching this channel right now. Anyway, back to the point. Beyond the walls, the decline of decentralization. The decline and decentralization of sanatoriums and asylums were driven by medical advancements, societal shifts, and ethical reconsiderations, leaving behind a haunting visual and historical legacy. Here's a concise exploration of these points. The medical advancements, with the development of effective antibiotics like streptomycin, in the 1940s, revolutionized the tuberculosis treatment, of course, and allowed patients to be treated outpatient or in general hospital, rendering sanatoriums almost obsolete. Similarly, the introduction of psychotropic medications, such as chlorpromazine in the 1950s, enabled better management of mental health conditions outside of institutional settings. These innovations reduced the need for long-term confinement, emptying many facilities in the long run. Decentralization movement were societal and ethical critiques in the mid-20th century fueled deinstitutionalization exposés of inhuman conditions, overcrowding, and patient mistreatment in the asylums, coupled with work like Irving Goffman's Asylum in 1961 and Ken Kesey's, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in 1962, highlighted the loss of personal autonomy and dignity in institutions. Advocates, including mental health reformers and civil rights groups, pushed for community-based care, arguing it was more humane and cost-effective. Policies like the U.S. Community Mental Health Act of 1963 accelerated the closure of asylums, though inadequate funding for community services often left former patients underserved and basically nowhere to go. So, abandoned sanatoriums and asylums stand as eerie relics. Their decaying facades and silent wards, preserving stories of isolation, suffering, and resilience. Sprawling Victorian-era campuses like the Danvers State, with their Gothic architecture, which is quite beautiful, I might add, contrast with the later utilitarian designs built for efficiency. Overgrown grounds, shattered windows, and remnants, like patient art or medical equipment, evoke a sense of time frozen in place. These sites often explored by urban adventurers or documented in photography, serve as poignant reminders of medical and social eras that prioritized segregation over integration. The shift from institutionalization to community care reflects both progress and challenge, with these abandoned structures embodying a complex legacy of care, neglect, and societal change. The growing interest in adaptive reuse of these old asylums has breathed new life into former sanatoriums and asylums, transforming historical structures into vibrant spaces for modern use. Once built to isolate or treat patients with mental health conditions or tuberculosis, these forgotten fortresses, or prisons, I might say, are now being reimagined as residential complexes, cultural centers, and unique places for tourism and dogs to bark at no noise at all. Point is, there have been a lot of changes in mental health facilities, and a lot of the old designs for asylums are embodied in more modern prison systems for the idea of holding people. And now mental health is obviously more focused on getting you the meds you need and to talk to the people you need to hear from and all that. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. There was more to this, but I'm looking at 35 minutes, and I feel like I'm repeating myself at this point. But thanks for watching DJX Chronicles. I got the script from a Grok program again, and it was a little bit winded. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that.